Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's episode of One Last Thing with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. You know, it's an exciting time to be a Ravens fan, and as we start to get ready for the postseason and have some really high profile, important games coming up, and you know what better time to be a football fan than this?
Oh, this is definitely a great time to embrace what it is. And I still see a lot of negativity around. I'm not going to get into it in this episode. We talked a lot about it on the offense and defensive episodes. I don't get it. I'll just put it that way. I don't get it. This is a time to be happy. Yeah, sure, you might be frustrated with no home game, but be happy. We're here to talk about something else though today. Mark Andrews scored the first touchdown against the Jets, set the career record for touchdowns as a Raven. That's any position. But maybe lead us in with that in terms of the Mark Andrews situation and one of the videos you saw.
Yeah, so today the Baltimore Ravens Twitter page posted a video of every single one of Mark Andrews' touchdowns, culminating in his touchdown this past weekend against the Giants. And, you know, you sit and watch the video, which is 12 minutes and change long. So that just shows you how what a hand Mark Andrews has had in being a playmaker for this team for so many years. And, you know, it just occurred to me that you really can't tell the story of the Baltimore Ravens over the past, 7 or so years without Mark Andrews. And just, I started thinking about what an incredible achievement it is for Andrews to have sort of surpassed Jamal Lewis's touchdown figure. Jamal Lewis last played for the Baltimore Ravens in 2006, and even though the league was starting to gear a little bit more towards the offense, maybe around that time, it was a much different time. So, maybe younger fans wouldn't appreciate, what it means to eclipse a guy like Jamal Lewis. Jamal Lewis was not only an offensive rookie of the year, not only an offensive player of the year, one of the few 2,000-yard rushers in all of NFL history. He was pretty much the Ravens offense for, at least 5 years. I mean, yes, you had Todd Heap, but you had a cavalcade of incompetent quarterbacks throwing the ball to him, right? So Jamal Lewis was constantly the focal point of Ravens offenses throughout those years, and he is really one of the best running backs probably that you'll ever see who is not going to make it into the Hall of Fame. So to eclipse his touchdown figure in Baltimore, I think is a really significant achievement and should be celebrated, which is what we're doing today.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's certainly Andrews and Lamar came into this league very much tied at the hip. And it's an interesting thing because you go back to the 2018 draft, Lamar, fantastic draft, obviously top to bottom, but the two players that they've kept after all these years are Jackson and Andrews. And yet Andrews was the second tight end drafted. The Ravens, of course, as I've said many times, blew it, not drafting Derwin James in the first round, traded back twice. A lot of people said they could have DJ Moore with the second pick as well, by the way. And then drafted Hayden Hurst at the end of the first round. And a guy who Andrews almost immediately took his job in 2018. Hurst had some injury problems he dealt with, obviously. And Andrews was paired up with Lamar from his very first camp as number 2 and number 2 kind of guys. And that was, I think, one of the big connecting factors between those two. And obviously great players, but they also had to be put together for a lot of this chemistry to build.
No doubt. And it is hilarious to me how the Ravens keep managing to double up on tight ends in the draft, and the second one outperforms the first. I mean, of course, Dennis Pitta outperformed Ed Dixon, and likely is outperforming Kolar. And so, I don't know what it is. Maybe DaCosta, made or Ozzie made a deal with the devil, a very milquetoast deal that if they draft 2 tight ends, that the second one will be awesome, and the first one, will have mixed results. But either way, you've got to be glad that we ended up with Mark Andrews in the third round, I believe, and the or maybe even later.
Third,
Yeah,
number 86, I think overall.
And of course, is a huge contributor to the 2018 draft being, one of the top contenders for Ozzie Newsome's best drafts.
Or any best draft in NFL history.
Right. And of course, that story is still being written. But when you have a draft that, where you drafted Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis in the same first round, that's really high praise that you're even considering any other draft.
Right. It was a ridiculously successful draft. But back to Andrews in 2018, he set an all-time Ravens record, which still stands with 11.04 yards per target that year. Right off the bat, 120.5 passer rating throwing to him. And this is Joe Flacco and a rookie, Lamar, who is not as efficient a passer, but still the passes to Andrews were good targets that year. I thought he had a lot less contested targets as a rookie, and that was very positive. The highlight play I think most people remember is that 68-yard touchdown to the LA Chargers. Caught the ball in stride over his shoulder, stiff-armed a player off him and took it the distance in a critically important game. The Ravens were forced to play on short rest, crossing the country. They had to win that game to win the division, and in fact, even to make the playoffs. So if they had lost that game, they would have been out. No one did the Ravens any favors down the stretch in terms of scheduling or playing, and in fact, they were right down to the wire the next week, with Mosley's interception finally sealing their playoff spot and, in fact, the AFC North.
And, something that I remember fondly about that catch in particular against the Chargers is it was one of the very first, I think, wow passes of Lamar Jackson's NFL career. I mean, it really showed, touch. He threaded the throw over one defender with and then under the other with Mark Andrews really finding the soft spot in the coverage between the two. But it really took, he hit him in perfect stride. Andrews showed off his motor, which I don't think maybe we saw as much up to that point. I mean, for him that's still one of the longest catch and runs for Mark Andrews in his career. At this point, he has exceeded it at various times, but really showed off kind of the dynamism that maybe you didn't expect by looking at Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I'm going to try to look for his long touchdown pass otherwise in his entire career. Yeah, he had a 74 in 2018. Really? Okay, that means a 74-yard catch, not a touchdown. Now, he hasn't had a longer one since. He hasn't had even a 68 since. But that's interesting. That had to be a non-touchdown for 74 yards in that rookie season. I'm kind of forgetting that. Probably wasn't in the highlight video.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I knew he had a longer catch, but maybe not a longer touchdown. But yeah, I mean, it was just a start of a really beautiful kind of mind meld relationship between Mark Andrews and Lamar.
Let's move along to 2019. Andrews had his best touchdown year, established himself as the top red zone threat for the team. If he had not already done, they had about 3 touchdowns a year before, but in 2019, he was a guy that Lamar, in the middle of that amazing streak of not throwing any interceptions in the red zone, but throwing lots of touchdowns. He was like 57-0 at one point. Very different quarterback in that he doesn't throw fade routes, still really doesn't. But he will try and go high, and then Andrews is his guy, or he'll try and just find a direct area to throw a laser-like throw by moving the pocket right and left as he sees fit, and that has been very effective at both. And Andrews has been a very significant component of Lamar's ability to do that.
Yeah, something that Mark Andrews really excelled at, particularly in the red zone, is just boxing out defenders. Usually he's the biggest guy in the end zone, and he has a great awareness of defenders around him, how to position his body such that Lamar feels very confident, even if a defender is draped over Andrews' back, that Mark will be able to haul that in, and if need be, he has a lot of touchdowns where, it's at the 1 yard line or the 2 yard line where he makes the catch and he's able to either just bully his way in or extend at the last second, and just like really great awareness, which is, I think part of what led to such a hyper efficient year for both Lamar and Mark Andrews in 2019.
Yeah, it was a very efficient year. The passer rating was over 100 throwing to him, but we're seeing now the beginning of a 5-year period in 2019 where he's on a downward slope of passer rating throwing to him. And what's happening during that period is that Lamar is throwing more to Andrews as his bailout guy, which is reducing the marginal value of his targets. So even though Lamar's his target percentage got obscene, in fact, in 2019 was really the first indication that he was really the designated receiver for the Ravens. He'd come on the field, and he got a very high target share as a percentage of his on-field snaps. Hayden Hurst really resented that. And in fact, he asked to be traded at the end of the year because he wanted to be the number one tight end threat somewhere. The Ravens sent him packing to Atlanta. I think it was a good trade for definitely the Ravens to get a second round pick back for Hurst. They didn't really need him, as much as they could value a second round pick anyway. And that was all born of Andrews really being Lamar's guy and the guy he wanted in there on those obvious passing situations. So Hurst was being asked to do more blocking, and it's just a natural byproduct. You often cannot make multiple players at the same position happy.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing that now. Not so much. I mean, I certainly haven't heard any complaints out of Isaiah Likely or Charlie Kohler, but
Deontay Johnson,
all of that. Well, yeah, that's another story. But we're sort of seeing the everybody thinks it's so easy to feature two tight ends in sort of every sense of the word, just because I guess the Patriots were able to do it long ago with two nuclear talents in Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. But first of all, those two guys were pretty singular in their ability, and secondly, just because they were able to do that on that team doesn't mean that that's always going to work out everywhere else. So it is certainly nice to have a wealth of depth in the tight end room, but as Hayden Hurst sort of figured out, to your point, that it's easier said than done to feature those two guys at once.
All right, let's move on. We're ready to move on to 2020, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
We're the aggregate stats from the 20 to 22 era, which I've kind of grouped these together, mountainous in terms of the pile that's getting up. 149 targets in 2021 with 1,361 yards, but his efficiency is again declining during this period. 9 interceptions in the 21 season. He did improve as a run blocker during this era, so he's spending more snaps on the field. He became what Jamal Lewis was to the offense in terms of being an every down player. Yeah,
I think the efficiency or the declining efficiency and the increasing targets and the relationship between those two things is pretty natural given how much those targets increased. But I think that speaks to a couple things. Number one, how good of a player and how essential a player Mark Andrews was, but also the talent or maybe lack thereof that was surrounding him on the receiving end. Now, some of this was bringing in free agents who didn't pan out. Your Sammy Watkins of the world and the like, but also some of this was just bad luck. Hollywood Brown got hurt a whole bunch, and then he asked to be traded, and boy, oh boy, was the return on that excellent.
Yep.
And of course, Rashad Bateman, who kind of early on was injured, and then looked like he was going to be, a major, part of this offense before getting injured again. He's only now really getting back on track in a big way. And as a Bateman truther, I'm really proud to, rub everybody else's nose in it. But of course, during this sort of period, Mark Andrews really was the security blanket to a detriment, I think, of Lamar. Lamar keyed on him so much that opposing opposing defenses knew, that's the guy that they need to cover up, and that's where these marginal targets that you're talking about come into play.
So in terms of big plays, I went back to 2020. You may have seen some other touchdowns from this area you want to talk about, but 2 DDs in that opening 38-6 win over the Browns. Really big time beatdown. The Browns haven't always been, terrible during this era, and that was just one where the Ravens got uncharacteristically dominated on both sides, offense and defense, at the line of scrimmage, and still won a game 38-6. I've really never seen anything like it. But a lot of it was Lamar with 4 out of 27 ample time and space opportunities, and his connection with Andrews getting open for a couple of TDs that was really wonderful.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember whether this was the year where we played the no longer existing Washington football team.
Yes, because 2020 was the NFC East.
That's right. So he had several, I think, touchdowns in that game. Including a pretty long one where he ran to the left corner of the end zone, and then got behind all of the defenders for an easy one later in that day. So it was one of many 2 touchdown games in his career, and where he just dominated the competition. I mean, what more can you say about that guy?
Well, let's talk about the 21 season for a minute. To me, the high point for him that year was his performance along with Lamar. Lamar had one of the really great games of his career against the Colts in that comeback win where I think he was 38 of 42 throwing the ball, and brought the Ravens back with 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions from a 16-point deficit. Andrews caught both 2-point conversions, and then I believe he also caught the game-winning touchdown in overtime. And I have to go back and actually look if that was the case. It might have been somebody else, but truly amazing game that day for Andrews. I mean, it may have been the tying or the touchdown that gave him a chance to tie, and then the 2-point conversion with both his. But there wasn't anybody else that Jackson had any interest in throwing the ball to on those 2 2-point conversions other than Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, he really was the go-to guy, and I think he caught the touchdowns themselves as well. And so the first of those 2 touchdowns, both these touchdowns sort of exemplify what I was talking about before. Mark Andrews sort of just standing at the very front of the end zone, at right over the goal line, and just Lamar knowing that he's big enough to just box everybody out. And then the second touchdown is sort of at the he catches it sort of right in front of the goal line, right outside of the goal line, and just knowing that he's got the strength and the awareness to extend ahead.
Yeah, and actually the overtime touchdown was Marquise Brown, now that I look at it, but it was the last 2 touchdowns that brought him back from 16, plus the last 2 2-point conversions were Jackson to Andrews. So incredible night of football there. In 2022, it was a down year for him, and it was the absolute nadir of his effectiveness in terms of per target productivity. 10 targets for 73 yards in that postseason loss to the Bengals. Had to play a lot in 21 and 22 without Jackson, obviously. In that game in particular, Tyler Huntley was the man. And Tyler Huntley, unfortunately, was the man who fumbled at the 1-yard line and allowed the game-winning touchdown by the Bengals. But Andrews was one of the players who really kept him in that game with 10, I think it was 5 catches for 73 yards and 10 targets.
And he also had a 2-touchdown game with against the Packers with Huntley throwing the ball. If you can score 2 touchdowns with Lamar Huntley throwing you the ball, I mean, I think that's pretty impressive, I'd say.
There you go. We should make every quarterback who plays here have to use the first name Lamar, including Tyler Huntley. That would be a fun thing. Anyway, 2023, he rebounded in terms of per snap productivity to the highest level of efficiency that he'd had in his career. So Jackson spread the ball much better around the field, 135.1 passer rating throwing to him. And it was over 140 for the tight end group as a whole, which is just one of the really incredible statistics I've ever seen. 12 touchdowns, no interceptions, throw to the tight ends. Again, this is the first year of Todd Monken. The offense is much more directed towards the wide receiver group. Wide receiver group was very good, but the tight end group was what really drove the passing game. Despite that, the total targets to tight ends were way down. It was down from 190, I believe, in 2022 to 110 maybe in 2023. And it's just one of these things is like, how much is like marginal target lack of efficiency, or how much do we really need more targets to the tight ends if they're going to be this good, kind of thing. And unfortunately, you're usually playing that balancing act. And I think that one of the really great things they've gotten from Monken, that has been to Andrews' detriment to a small degree, has been a much better distribution of targets.
Yeah, I think Monken sort of got it right, that it was important to sort of shift. I mean, we still rely, as you point out on your offensive shows time and again, that we play much heavier than other teams, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't room to kind of shift that in a sense relative to how we have been. And I think, the numbers really have favored that, that for the efficiency for the tight end room and Mark Andrews. I mean, obviously 2023 was a difficult year for Mark Andrews. Of course, at the start of the season, the efficiency towards him is phenomenal, but then he gets this, horrible injury from the hip drop tackle. Logan Wilson, I believe, week 11 against Cincinnati. And at that point, you got to start wondering. I mean, I think a lot of people started wondering out loud whether this was sort of the beginning of the end for Mark Andrews in Baltimore. And that's a conversation that's still ongoing, but it's certainly not for lack of effectiveness, which I think was a concern that carried over into the start of this season in 2024.
Yeah, legitimate question. He had last year in 23, he had that back right corner of the end zone leaping touchdown versus Cleveland. Still one of the throws I remember from Lamar's MVP season, because I thought it was very ill-advised. Yeah, it worked out. If you want to be results-based, yeah, it worked out. But the truth of the matter was, he probably shouldn't have thrown that ball. Andrews just made it work out. And it was a great throw, too. I don't mean to minimize it here, but Jackson does some things on the field that are just amazing in terms of fitting a ball in a window. And Andrews has played obviously a big hand in that. Of course, after the injury, he returned to the AFC Championship, played briefly and ineffectively in that game. And it was unfortunate. The injury things did hold over until 24. He had that car crash in camp that kept him out. He also had an injury like the day before the car crash occurred that may have been overlapping with it and caused it to be worse. But apparently he was wearing a seatbelt. Fortunately, even though his car is said to have rolled over or whatever, that he was in a, ended up with a better situation than he might have otherwise had he not been wearing a seatbelt. So thankfully that occurred. And he wasn't the same player right off the bat or in the early part of the season, but he's come back to have another very efficient year with 9.7 yards per target, 138.8 passer rating going to him, which is the highest of his career by now, again, despite the lower target volume. He's only had 53 targets in this season.
And by the way, his last touchdown of the season in 2023 was week 7 against the Cardinals. Mm-hmm. I guess week 8. And then the first touchdown of the season for this year was week 6 against the Commanders. So, it almost going a full season without having a touchdown. I mean, I think it was, especially with Likely filling in pretty admirably in those early weeks. I think a lot of people wrote Andrews off. And, I certainly had my doubts, just wondering what the nature was of the car accident and how he might come back from that. But he's rebounded in an incredible way. And it's nice to see players like Mark Andrews and Marlon Humphrey, who have been a staple for so long, sort of make their emphatic comeback and play well late into their careers.
Yeah, Patrick Ricard be another one, but yeah, they've had a number of players who've been able to reestablish themselves on the football field. He's snaps are well off his career high this year, but he's asked to do more as an inline blocker, particularly with the injury to Charlie Kolar. He's a guy who I think he improved as a blocker a lot in mid career. He's not the guy you want ideally as an inline guy. You really want him outside, flexed wide, and then blocking a level 2 player as opposed to a lineman or an edge. And that honestly has been something they've asked him to do a lot this year, which is probably like asking Daniel Fa'alele to pull. It's just a little bit out of his wheelhouse in terms of what he can do.
I think one of those is a little bit more out of that person's wheelhouse than the other, but
yeah. So anyway, his high point for me this year was that leaping end zone catch against Philly. It's like sandwiched in between 2 Philly players, and he still goes up and gets the football, brings it down, and he must have a vice-like grip because there wasn't any doubt about somebody trying to take the ball away from him. Kind of reminds me of Anquan Bolden a little bit like that.
Totally.
It's like you try and pry that ball away from me at your own peril because I'm going to twist and break your arm if you do.
That's exactly what I was thinking actually while I was watching some of these highlight plays. Anquan Bolden was extremely good at tracking the ball. He had, like you said, a vice-like grip, and he had just incredible body control and sort of spatial awareness of what the defenders were doing around him. So, the number of catches that would be sort of you would consider a contested catch for anybody else was sort of, Anquan Bolden, or in this case, Mark Andrews, just ragdolling people around them and just, men among boys, which is one of the reasons he's been such an incredible piece of the offensive puzzle for the Ravens.
And we saw him set the record on just a gorgeous play. 3rd and 13, Ravens are in the red zone. They've been terrific there, but this looked like probably a stop and a Tucker field goal attempt was most likely. And not only did he find a place to be open, using air quotes, a few yards into the end zone, but he's covered by Isaiah Simmons, who had juked at the line of scrimmage. Simmons had to recover, stumbled, then he recovered and tried to get back into the play, but his back is to the quarterback, and Lamar, of course, whenever he sees that, really takes advantage of it. Andrews presented himself, I thought, very well on the play, but he didn't put his hands up. And the reason that was important is he went up hands up at the last second to catch that football much later than Isaiah Simmons had any chance to react to it, as we've seen happen all too often with Brandon Stephens this year in terms of back shoulder throws.
And I think something else that we should highlight that Mark Andrews is extremely good at is the scramble drill. I mean, the number of times that Lamar has been basically sprinting backwards because the play is taking long to develop, or the coverage is, whatever it is, Lamar's doing his thing, and you're thinking, okay, this is like, if we can just get to a throwaway, we'll take that result. But he's found his guy downfield time and again, and that's a really important quality. I think when you are, and I think like Rashad Bateman's developed that. I think in recent times, Nelson Aguilar's shown the ability to do that, but Mark Andrews has really consistently been a great guy to help bail out in those situations that Lamar can really turn into profit.
Could completely agree, by the way, and that's been one of the big developmental opportunities for the Ravens receiving group as a whole, is to have Isaiah Likely and Kolar and Bateman become guys that could be trusted, Flowers for that matter, later on a play. And it makes all the difference, because that's where the marginal targets pile up, is the mind meld that Andrews knew he had that Jackson really knew he had with Andrews was at such a high level that he would end up looking for him an unhealthy percentage of the time. And that was really something that it's better off certainly to spread the wealth there, and you end up taking fewer chances with the football on those plays. But I can't believe we got all the way to this point in here. We hadn't talked about Andrews on extended plays yet. That's thanks for picking me up on that.
Well, I mean, there's just so much, so much positive to talk about. I'm trying to remember, is it against the Bengals this year where where Lamar was basically chased backwards? I mean, he went back, yep. I don't know how many yards. And I don't think Andrews scored on this, but he got them basically to the goal line on a really just unbelievable scramble by Lamar that took time, took so much time, and and Mark just kept moving, kept presenting himself as a target for Lamar.
All right. So you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think we have to talk about it here, and that is 2024. In some ways, seems like it could be the swan song for Andrews in Baltimore. He's coming into the last year of his contract. He's got $12 million. I think it's $11 million. He'll be paid in base salary next year. And when I look at a contract, doesn't matter what his cap number is, because there's a whole bunch of sunk cost in that cap. There's $11 million they can save by cutting Mark Andrews next year. And the point has been made to me by Brian McFarland that he thought that Andrews has trade value. And you know what? He's right. There's some other team out there who's struggling at tight end that wants Mark Andrews for $11 million and would give the Ravens maybe a 4th round pick for the surplus value to contract that they could get. And you can't think of it, I know people would be real upset. Trade Mark Andrews for a 4th round pick. We can't do that. Well, you wouldn't do it. You're really considering cutting him. So it's very similar to the Anquan Boldin situation. They didn't trade Anquan Boldin for a 6th round pick. They got a 6th round pick as salvage value because they were going to cut Anquan Boldin. And the same thing might be true, of Andrews coming up, that they'll get hopefully some not insignificant salvage value for Andrews if they do decide to cut him. And I think there will be pressure probably from Lamar to try and keep him.
Yeah. And, Andrews' excellent play this season and sort of a reaffirmation of his durability, because up until that injury, he had been extremely durable in his career. And the injury wasn't that the way that he's come back from the injury, I think doesn't make you think that that you should expect him to be less durable beyond the natural progression of time. But the way he's played this season, I think, has now given the Ravens like a buffet of good options, right? Or it put them in the best position that they can possibly be in, right? Whether you cut or you trade him, you're going to be saving, money that's really important and really valuable. Or if you decide to keep him, you're keeping an excellent player, and he some of these longtime, Ravens players with quote unquote big contracts, whether it's Ronnie Stanley or Marlon Humphrey, Mark Andrews, all of them have really stepped up this season, and that's a good thing. If you have to choose between a bunch of players who are playing really, really well and which ones you can keep, that's an enviable position to be in.
That's exactly the position you want. And if you're the Chicago Bears or any number of other teams that are bottom feeders and haven't been good drafters, you end up having to trade for a player that you can then sign to a lucrative contract, and that's just the double-edged sort of misery there to have to do that. The Ravens, yes, it's heartbreaking to lose whatever player they decide to have to part ways with, whether it's Stanley, I don't think it'll be Humphrey, but if it was, that would be heartbreaking, or Andrews. It will hurt. It will hurt like hell to have to do that, but it's also going to hurt if they don't try and sign those 3rd-year players. And, the Ravens are in the enviable position also because they have Likely and they have Kohler, and those are a couple of guys they can go to war with next year if they have to. And I think Likely, it's now extremely close in my mind whether an extension of Andrews or Likely might be the better option. And I think it would be, at this point, a right player, right price deal for me. You have an older player in Andrews, so you'd hope to get a lower price on his contract than Likely. And I think that is probably the way that would work out, by the way. But whoever they sign, they may make an offer to both players and say, hey, look, we can pay you X, Isaiah, we can pay you Y, Andrews, and Andrews' deal may be actually a little bit lower because of the age and the expected decline you'd see from him.
Yeah, they had to deal with this when Ben Grubbs and Marshall Yanda were both up for contracts at the same time.
Ray Lewis and Bart Scott,
yeah.
and that was maybe more to this point because the older player was being offered less money, even though he'd had the much brighter career.
Yeah, you have to project for the future, and even though Isaiah Likely just brings you a different dimension, but they have Isaiah Likely has shown, I think, the requisite sort of trust from Lamar already. Lamar will go to him in a tough situation and things like that. And next season can turn out a bunch of different ways, right? Or rather, the off season. If they're unable to sign Ronnie Stanley, which obviously would be bad, but if Ronnie Stanley gets some, it's very reasonable to imagine Ronnie Stanley getting a pretty big contract offer that the Ravens simply won't be able to match.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, I don't think that the Ravens are going into free agency to get sort of a top flight left tackle, because they'd probably just keep Ronnie Stanley, right? So if that's the case and there's sort of more money available, that might mean something different for the relatively to keeping Mark Andrews. I think that as far as if I had my druthers, I think if we're picking 2 out of the 3, just based on positional value and based on who we have behind those players, I think it's pretty clear that Ronnie Stanley and Marlon Humphrey would be the preferable 2 to keep. But that doesn't take anything away from Mark Andrews. He's done everything possible. He's achieved everything he could from the position. He's played it incredibly well. We just have a wealth of depth at that position, which is also not as important a position as left tackle and corner.
It's also mildly ironic that twice in his career already, Andrews has facilitated trades of former first-round draft picks to get the Ravens extraordinary value in each case, both in the Hurst trade and the Marquise Brown trade. And now he might be the victim of such a right player, right price arrangement.
Yeah, and I really do think that a trade seems really very possible to me. I mean, he's played so well, and tight end is not that it's not that expensive a position that a team couldn't see their way to, making an offer and then signing, with the intent to sign the player down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does seem like it, that could be in the cards, and hopefully he will be leaving Baltimore with a championship ring on his finger, and he'll be able to forge the remaining years of his career somewhere else and keep padding those stats.
Yeah, and he's not gone yet, folks. So we understand there is a reasonable chance that the Ravens keep Andrews, but I think we've got to all kind of own up to the possibility that he might not be a Raven next year, and really appreciate the great career he's had here. And that's all we're trying to do, I think, with this episode.
Yeah, before it's all said and done over the next couple of weeks and into the playoffs, I think Mark Andrews will have a lot to say about what transpires. And hopefully we're just going to keep, racking up minutes on that highlight reel.
And as soon as the 2029 or the 2030 season, we'll see Andrews back here, inducted into the Ring of Honor. It could be later than that, but it certainly could be that early, and he is well deserving of the honor.
Absolutely.
Slava, always a pleasure doing this show with you. Tell folks where they can contact with you online.
You can find me on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVA KUPERSTEIN.
All right, other folks out there, thanks again for listening. If you want to do the show a favor, write us a 5-star 50-word review. If you would like to otherwise help, just tell some other people about the program and see if it's some content that they would like. Particularly older people who don't listen to podcasts are usually a group we're trying to tap into, and appreciate your help doing that. For Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye. We'll talk to you next week on One Last Thing.